Hello there, my name is Jenni Murnane, and I would like to thank you for joining me here on Splitcoaststampers for this tutorial on my spinner cards. I came up with the idea of using my sewing machine to attach the spinner section of a card when I was designing a project for my scan and cut. It turned out to be so successful that I decided to see if I could translate the process for use with my die cutting machine, and this is what I've come up with. This is the card I'm going to share with you today. I'm afraid this is going to be a long video, but there are two totally new processes involved, so please stick with me. The elements we will need to complete the project are a 5x7 inch card base, a 5x7 inch piece of craft card, a 5x7 inch piece of white card, and a 4 7/8 by 6 7/8 piece of green card for the inner lining. The dies I used are the chubby owl die and the decorative round dies from Crafts for You. I used the largest of the round dies. I also used a plain circle die from Kaisercraft, and for this project I've used the second to largest die. I used a wood grain folder to emboss the craft card for the front of the card, and for the owl I used Tim Holtz deco sheet and a Christina Ray textured paper. I have used a vintage photo distress ink pad on the craft card and low tack painter's tape. To construct the card, I have used tape runner and Ranger multi-matte medium. For the sewing machine, we need monofilament thread loaded onto both the machine and the bobbin. To mark our crosshairs, we need a T-ruler, a scoreboard, a permanent marker, and a friction erasable pen or pencil. The process I came up with requires the marking of crosshairs onto your card and dies. The first thing we need to do is mark a crosshair onto our dies, and I do this by first cutting a piece of paper with my die, and then I fold this in half and then fold it again in the other direction, aligning the first fold mark to get the quadrant lines for my die. I've marked one here with pen so that you can see more easily what I am doing. I then place the die cut back into the die and hold it in place with some tape, while I transfer the quadrant marks to the edges of the die using a permanent marker and my ruler. I also like to mark a reference mark so that I can align the die in the same direction each time. The die is now marked up and ready for use. When using an intricate die like the owl, I find the easiest way is to use the outer piece of paper and to fold it down the centre and then refold, aligning the first fold and the top and bottom of the die cut as before. In this way we can place the die back into the aperture and see where the fold lines are. I've marked the lines here so that you can see them, laid the owl back into the open space and then transferred my marks. This owl is not symmetrical, so I do not need to mark a reference mark, but what I will have to do is remember that one of the owls will need to be cut in reverse, as I'll be adding one to either side of the first die cut. To mark up our card, we're going to take our card base, which measures 10 inches by 7, and lay it onto the scoreboard. The halfway mark is going to be 5 inches, and halfway across the front of the card is going to be 7.5 inches. As you can see, I've run a pencil mark down my score line so that I can see that I'm running directly straight, or you can just pop a piece of painter's tape there to mark it. I'm now going to take my friction erasable pen and mark a line down the centre front of my card. I take my die and lay it onto the card front and align the centre mark I've made on my die with the line down the centre of the card front. I now measure from the side of the card to the side of the die, and we can see that this measurement is 5/8 of an inch. And just to say that it is accurate, we can see that the other side is also 5/8 of an inch. So the distance we need to place the die down from the top of the card base to ensure even spacing on the three sides is also going to be 5/8 of an inch. We move the die to this measurement, and then holding the die in place, we measure down the side of the card to the crosshair marking on the die, and this is 2.5 inches. So our crosshair is going to be marked at 2.5 inches. Again, so that you can see that I've transferred the line down the scoreboard, and I'm going to mark a line across the centre front of my card. I do the same thing with my other two pieces of cardstock, and you can now see how quickly, easily and accurately you can make these alignment marks on each of your card pieces once you've established the position of the crosshairs using your marked die. I now take my circle die and align the crosshairs on the die to the crosshairs on the card front. I use a couple of pieces of low-tack tape to hold it in place and run it through the die cutting machine. I repeat this for the other card pieces. Once we've done this, our card front will look like this. The first owl is cut from the circle cut from the card base. So I remove the circle from the front of the card, take the owl die and align it on the crosshairs. I hold it in place with painter's tape and run it through the die cutting machine. We now have a card with our owl cut from the centre of the circle, which has been cut from the front of the card. We make sure that all of the intricate pieces have been removed from the die cut, and then realign this back into the front of the card with the crosshairs aligned. Using some small pieces of tape to hold the pieces in place, I take two longer pieces of tape and align them one on either side of the centre line, leaving a very narrow gap. Turn the card over and remove the circle piece of card so that the owl, or whatever die cut you use, is now suspended in the centre of the aperture. Take another two pieces of tape and lay them over the back of the first two pieces. The reason we do this is so that the sticky back of the tape does not stick to the bed of our machine as we sew. And the reason we lay this here is so that the feed dogs have something to run on as we sew across these open spaces. We take this to our sewing machine, which we've threaded up with the monofilament thread, and we're going to stitch forward a couple of stitches, back 3 or 4 stitches, and then sew slowly down the centre following the black line, and then reverse a few stitches and forward again to securely lock off the stitching. I set my machine on a normal stitch length, but I release the tension slightly so that the monofilament is not stretched as we sew. I never use an automatic tie-off when I'm doing this, as it sews up and down in the same place, and this could result in card cutting through. You will now have the owl with a row of stitching through the centre of it. We're now going to carefully remove the tape, and if the card underneath does happen to tear a little bit, it is not an issue, as all of the pieces are going to be completely encased by our other die cuts. This is about when I remember the old trick of touching the tape to your skin a couple of times just to reduce the stickiness to enable you to remove it more easily. Flip the card over and remove the tape from the back. Just be sure to hold the card and the spinner as you do this so that it does not put any undue pressure on the stitching. Once all of the tape is removed, you will see that our spinner is perfectly centered in the aperture and spins beautifully. We're now ready to start putting the card together. I've embossed the card front and dragged the distress ink pad down it to accentuate the texture this has created. We are going to run tape runner over the back, making sure we come in close to the aperture to ensure it adheres well to the card base. The easiest way to align our card pieces is to lay the card base into the corner of the scoreboard, and then holding the corner of the craft card up at an angle, place it into the corner, lining it along the top of the scoreboard, and then lay it down onto the card base. This will give us perfectly aligned card pieces. Before I lay the inner lining in place, I trim a whisker off the side of it so that it closes easily. Again, we want to make sure we have tape close to the opening. Lay the piece into the scoreboard as before, lay it down onto the card and press down to adhere. Close the card and burnish the score line. Add tape runner to the back of the remaining piece and centre it inside the card. As you can see, I have done a little bit of embellishment on this piece, and I've done this by using the cutaway from the leaves that I used on the front and stamped through it with Versamark ink, just to give it a little bit of detail. To finish the front of the card base, I'll add the decorative circle which I've cut from the deco sheet around the aperture. I add another die cut decorative circle to the inside of the card. As mentioned earlier in the video, I needed to cut one of the owls in reverse. The white owl I have cut with the right side of the paper placed down into the die, and the second owl I've placed the paper into the die so that the right side is facing upwards. This gives me a reverse image to adhere to the back of the spinner. I remove the backing from the gold owl and stick it to the reverse side of the spinner. I attach the white owl using multi-matte medium. To complete the owl, I have added black bling eyes, and I've adhered the cutouts from the beak on either side of the stitching to give it back the definition. I add the leaves, which I have cut with my scan and cut with multi-matte medium, making sure not to hinder the spinner mechanism. I add the second set of leaves in the same way. As a final touch, I add a bow with a glue dot. And this is our completed card. The processes used to make this spinner card are transferable to any card which requires alignment. It also works for X cards, and the advantage here is that you only require 2 sheets of card stitched through the centre, so you are halving the bulk and card requirements, and you also have a very securely attached spinner mechanism. This is another example of an X card which I've taken to another level. I would like to thank you for staying with me to the end of this video, and hope that you will try this process and find it easy to follow and translate to any card that you wish to make.